I never thought I'd become the spectacle at my own father's funeral. As I walked into the chapel, all eyes turned toward me not with sympathy, but with that subtle, poisonous smirk only family can wear. My brother Miles, standing near the pulpit, gave a half-laugh and leaned toward Aunt Ruth. She finally crawled back, just in time to see what she didn't earn. He muttered loud enough for the front pews to hear. I stood there, stunned. The whispers, the stares, the knowing glances, it was like I'd crashed a party I was never meant to be invited to. Except this wasn't a party. This was the last goodbye to the man who had once taught me how to play Beethoven on the upright piano in our living room. The same man who hadn't returned my calls in over 2 years. They said I was here for the money, that I'd only shown up now because I smelled inheritance, that I'd abandoned the family legacy to chase melodies instead of managing assets. And for a moment, I almost believed them. But I stayed. Through the glares, the silence, the humiliating laughter echoing in the church hall, I stayed because I knew something they didn't. Dad hadn't updated his will in years. They said they were wrong. When the lawyer walked in that afternoon holding a USB drive and when my father's face appeared on the screen, speaking from beyond the grave, I realized everything was about to change, and none of them were ready for it, especially Miles. My name is Camille Turner, and once upon a time, I was my father's melody. Before the arguments, before the silence, before the funeral, I was the little girl sitting cross-legged beneath his grand piano while he played Chopin late into the night. I remember tracing my fingers along the lacquered legs of the instrument, trying to feel the music in my bones. My father, Franklin Turner, was a man of structure and discipline, a private wealth manager, sharp-suited and always a few steps ahead of the market. But with me, in those quiet moments after work, he softened. He taught me my first scale on that piano, held my wrists steady, corrected my posture like a conductor molding a future virtuoso. Precision. Camille, he used to say. Emotion comes after structure. Back then, I thought we had a language all our own, but structure became something else as I got older. It became pressure. And the language we once shared unraveled the day I told him I didn't want to major in finance. I still remember how his expression changed when I said I wanted to study music composition instead. At first, he thought I was joking. When I didn't laugh, his face set like granite. We've spent years preparing for something real. Camille, he said slowly, as if I were failing a test. You're a Turner. Turners don't chase dreams. We build legacies. I still remember the silence at dinner that night. My mother stirring her soup without speaking. My brother Miles looking triumphant across the table. He'd always been the heir apparent, even when we were children. The one who mimicked Dad's phone calls, shadowed him at work, read the Wall Street Journal before puberty. I'd once thought of Miles as a rival. That night, I realized he was playing a different game entirely, one where I wasn't even on the board. Still, I held my ground. I got a scholarship to a music conservatory upstate. I moved out. Dad didn't stop me, but he didn't help me either. From that point on, our relationship became a polite performance. Calls on holidays, stiff birthday cards, the occasional check, always unsigned. He'd show up for my piano recitals once or twice a year, but he never stayed long. I have a board meeting, or flights early tomorrow. And I never asked for more. Miles, on the other hand, became the family's golden boy. He moved into the firm straight out of Wharton, shaking hands, closing deals, quoting Dad's old mantras like gospel, protect capital, build trust. Never invest in emotions. He made sure everyone knew that Camille had chosen art over responsibility, that I'd turned my back on the family. The stories he told behind my back, I only began to understand the damage years later. I'd send my father letters handwritten, personal, updates about my teaching job, my small concert gigs, the kids I was mentoring. Sometimes I sent photos of the studio I'd built in my tiny Brooklyn apartment or recordings of my students playing their first solos, but the responses grew fewer and fewer. Sometimes I got nothing at all. One summer, I booked a small venue in the city for my original compositions. I called Dad, hopeful, told him how meaningful it would be if he came. He didn't. Said Miles had a major client dinner that night and he needed to be present. I remember sitting in that dressing room backstage, staring at the one empty chair I'd saved in the front row. Still, I kept showing up, kept sending those letters. I believed that if I just worked harder, kept proving I was worth seeing, he'd come around. But over time, the silence began to feel intentional, like a wall had been built, brick by brick, and someone was making sure it stayed tall. It wasn't until my third year of teaching that I realized something was seriously wrong. A colleague had submitted one of my students to a youth piano competition sponsored by a foundation I'd never heard of, the Turner Fund for Youth Excellence. I laughed when I read the name on the flyer. I thought it was a coincidence, but it wasn't. It was Dad's foundation, my family's name, our name, and I hadn't known a thing about it. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, stunned, staring at the brochure. I flipped through the pages and saw a photo of my father smiling beside Miles, presenting a scholarship to a prep school student in Boston. The caption read, "The Turner family continues their proud tradition of investing in future leaders." No mention of me? No acknowledgement that I taught music to underfunded schools, that I mentored children who had no other outlet. Nothing. I tried to call Dad. It went to voicemail. Then I emailed. No response. Finally, I mailed him a letter. A simple note. I saw the foundation. I'd love to talk. Hope we can catch up soon. Love, Camille. Weeks passed. Nothing. And that's when I started to suspect maybe he never received it. The thought chilled me. I called again. Voicemail. I left a message. And then another. And another. I reached out to Miles, too hesitantly. But I had no choice. "Hey, I've been trying to get in touch with Dad." I said over the phone. Miles's voice was syrupy smooth, as always. "Oh, weird. He's been really busy with the foundation and the firm. Can you let him know I called?" "Sure," he said, "but he's just not really up for personal stuff lately. You know how it is." No, I didn't know how it was, and I started to wonder if I ever truly had. That Christmas, I didn't receive a card, no call, no email, nothing. The silence was loud. It wasn't just neglect, it was erasure. Over the next year, I poured myself into music and teaching, but a knot grew in my chest. I told myself I was overreacting, that Dad was just busy, that Miles wasn't capable of anything malicious. But then Megan, my best friend since college, pointed out something I couldn't ignore. "Camille," she said gently, "hasn't it always been Miles who passes along your messages?" I blinked. "Well, yeah." She tilted her head. "And hasn't he always been the one who told you Dad was too busy to come to your recitals, too tired to take your calls?" I didn't answer. Because I knew she was right. I started to think back, connecting pieces that never quite made sense. The unopened invitations, the missed calls, the coldness in Dad's voice during those rare conversations, like he was distant, like he barely remembered what I was doing with my life. That wasn't the man who had once sat beside me for hours as I practiced for Elise until my fingers cramped. It felt like someone had built a false version of me inside his mind, and I was starting to believe Miles had painted it. Still, I kept reaching out. I sent a framed photo from a youth orchestra concert where my students had performed one of my compositions. I signed the back, "For Dad. I still remember you humming this melody when I was 7. 2 months later, I found it for sale on an online secondhand site. Same frame, my handwriting still intact. I bought it back for $12.99, and I didn't tell anyone. That was when I stopped trying. Whatever remained of my relationship with my father had been hollowed out by something or someone I couldn't fight anymore. I convinced myself I was okay. I had my studio, my students, my music. But deep down, I was grieving a man who was still alive. A man who, somewhere along the line, had chosen to forget me, or maybe been convinced to. The call came on a Wednesday morning, just as I was tuning my student's piano. It was from an unfamiliar number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Some part of me always flinched when I saw a Massachusetts area code, but something told me to answer. "Miss Turner," a man's voice asked. Formal but soft. "Yes, this is she. My name is Alden Price. I was your father's attorney. I'm afraid I have some difficult news. Your father, Franklin Turner, passed away last night." My hand slipped. A string snapped. The note went sharp. I didn't speak. My mind blanked. My ears rang. For a second, I thought I might be sick. How I finally managed. Cardiac arrest. It was sudden. Peaceful, the housekeeper said. He passed at home. I swallowed hard. "Why are you the one calling me?" There was a pause. "Your brother Miles asked me to handle the communication." Of course he did. I thanked the attorney numbly and ended the call. My student looked at me, confused. As I stood in silence in the middle of the studio, "I'm sorry," I whispered. "We're done for today." I spent that evening in a daze, pacing my tiny Brooklyn apartment, surrounded by shelves of music books and photos my father had never seen. I called Miles 4 times before he finally picked up. "Camille," he answered flatly, as if I were interrupting something terribly important. "I assume Alden told you." "Yes." "Why didn't you call me yourself? I've had a lot on my plate. Arrangements? Logistics? You don't know how much goes into something like this." I bit my lip. "I would have helped, I'm sure," he replied, dry as dust. "The funeral is Friday, in Boston. St. Augustine's Church. That's 2 days away. Everything's already planned," he said quickly. "We followed Dad's wishes. He was very clear. Where am I staying?" There was a long pause. "The house is full. Uncle Charles and Aunt Ruth are staying in the guest rooms. You should probably get a hotel." Of course, the house I grew up in, the house with the ivory piano I first touched at age 5, had no room for me. "And Camille," Miles added, "there's a private family gathering Thursday night. Just a heads up. It's for immediate family only." His tone was clipped, definitive. I wasn't invited. Not really. I didn't argue. I booked a train that night and packed in silence. Every sweater, every scarf I folded reminded me of winters in our Beacon Hill home. Snow outside the windows, the sound of Dad's records playing upstairs, the smell of pine and whiskey, and then, always, silence. The kind that grew too thick to cut through. When I arrived in Boston, I went straight to the funeral home for the private viewing. The casket was oak, polished, expensive. My father lay still inside, in his best navy suit, the one he wore for shareholder meetings and Christmas cards. His silver hair was combed, his expression frozen in that half-frown of seriousness. I stood at the edge for a long time, just watching, waiting for some final word to arrive, some spiritual apology whispered from beyond. But it never came. "Hi, Dad," I finally said, voice trembling. "I guess this is it." I wanted to scream, I wanted to weep, but all that came out was a whisper. I told him everything I hadn't been able to for the past 5 years. About my life, about my students, about the time I played Rachmaninoff solo and didn't freeze up. I told him about the little girl who couldn't afford lessons, and how I taught her anyway. About how her mother cried when she played her first recital. "You would have liked her," I said softly. "She's bold. She doesn't give up." The next morning, I met Megan at the station. She'd taken the early train, just like she promised. "They're not going to break you," she said as we walked into the church together. I didn't reply, but I knew one thing they would try. Augustine's church was already half full when Megan and I arrived. The stained glass windows cast soft colors across the pews, and classical organ music filled the vaulted space. Everything was polished, composed just like my father would have liked it, but the atmosphere was colder than marble. As we walked down the aisle, the glances started sideways looks, whispered commentary, barely concealed smirks. My Aunt Ruth, in her black lace veil, narrowed her eyes as I passed. My cousin Elise looked away entirely. Miles, seated in the front pew like the grieving golden sun, didn't even acknowledge me. We sat toward the middle, flanked by strangers and silence. Megan reached over and squeezed my hand. "You don't owe them a thing," she whispered. I nodded, but still, my stomach twisted. The service began with a formal eulogy by the priest, followed by testimonies from business partners and a university dean. Each praised my father's legacy, his firm handshake, his unwavering commitment to excellence. Then Miles stood up. He took the podium with the confidence of someone who had already rehearsed his role. He talked about Dad's work ethic, his mentorship, the way he built Turner Financial from scratch. He talked about fishing trips, about summers in Cape Cod, about late-night strategy sessions over brandy. He painted a portrait of a father-son bond that glowed with pride and loyalty, and then, carefully, he shifted the tone. "My father valued loyalty above all else," Miles said, his voice ringing through the church. "He believed in family, real family, the kind that shows up, that carries the weight." He didn't look at me, but every word was pointed like a dagger. "Some people," he continued, "choose other paths. They trade duty for dreams. And that's their right. But they shouldn't return now pretending to mourn a man they abandoned." The room went still. The unspoken words were loud. "She's only here for the money." I felt heat rush to my face. Megan's grip on my hand tightened. I wanted to stand up and say something, anything, but I stayed seated, frozen. After the service, everyone moved into the reception hall. I stood near the coffee table, trying to blend into the wallpaper, when Miles approached. Two of our cousins trailed behind him like bodyguards. "Enjoying yourself?" he asked, voice low but sharp. "Nice of you to show up. How's the music career going?" "Now's not the time," I muttered. He smiled. "Oh, I think it's the perfect time. You're back just in time for the reading. Aren't you hoping for a payout?" People nearby turned their heads. Elise was openly watching now. "I came to say goodbye," I said calmly, "whether you believe that or not." He stepped closer, leaning in. "Dad was done with you. Camille, everyone here knows it. You're not family anymore. Just a name on a forgotten page." I didn't respond. Because if I did, I'd cry. And I couldn't give him that satisfaction. Uncle Charles wandered over and placed a hand on Miles's shoulder. "Let's not drag this out," he said loudly. "Camille's made her choice. Let's leave it there." He didn't even look at me. I stood in that room, surrounded by faces I used to call family, and realized just how thoroughly I'd been erased, reduced to a cautionary tale. The prodigal daughter who never got a feast, just a funeral. But I stayed. I stayed through the sideways glances, the awkward condolences, the calculated cruelty of people who had written me off years ago, because something deep inside me knew this wasn't over. They had already decided the will would humiliate me, that Dad had disinherited me, that my role was to slip away quietly, shamed. But I knew my father better than they thought. And I still had one reason to stay. The truth hadn't been spoken yet, but it was coming. The longer I stood in that room, the more invisible I felt. People I hadn't seen in a decade floated by with practiced sympathy, offering hollow condolences as if reading from a script. Every interaction felt choreographed, designed not to comfort but to remind me where I stood on the outside. A footnote at best, an inconvenience at worst. I moved toward the far corner near the window, needing air, needing distance. Megan stayed close, acting as my anchor. But even she couldn't stop the slow unraveling inside me. I sipped bitter coffee from a styrofoam cup as my cousin Elise passed by, her voice dripping in false cheer. "Camille, I heard you're living in Brooklyn now, still teaching piano." "Right." I nodded once, wary. She smiled with delicate cruelty. That must be fulfilling. Then, before I could respond, she turned to another guest and laughed. It's always sweet when people follow their passions, even if they don't lead anywhere. It stung, but not as much as what came next. Miles, never one to leave an opportunity unused, raised his glass in a mock toast across the room and called out, loud enough for half the guests to hear, "To the return of our family's prodigal pianist." Laughter rippled. A few gasps. Megan moved toward him, but I caught her arm. "No," I whispered. "Let him finish." Miles strolled over, still holding his glass. "Come on, Camille. You know I'm just joking. You always were the sensitive one." "What do you want?" I asked, voice low, controlled. To be honest, he leaned in, all charm curdled into condescension. "I want you to prepare yourself. Tomorrow, when that will is read, it's going to be official. Dad didn't forget who showed up, who stayed." I stared at him. "You think I don't know what you've done?" I said quietly. He raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean you've been feeding him lies for years? Controlling what he saw?" "What he didn't," he smirked. "All I did was protect Dad from disappointment. You chose your path. Camille, you left." "No," I said, my voice shaking. "You pushed me out." That wiped the smirk from his face for a second, but only a second. "Believe whatever you need to," he said, stepping back. "Tomorrow will make everything clear." He walked away without looking back, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity, because tomorrow wasn't just about money. It was about my name, my truth, my place in this family, even if they never truly saw me. Megan found me a few minutes later outside in the small garden behind the reception hall. I stood near a stone bench, trying to slow my breathing. "I can't do this," I admitted. "Not again." She looked at me, calm but firm. "You can. You will. Because deep down, you know the truth. They all think I'm nothing." I whispered. "They think that because it's easier than admitting they were wrong about you." I looked away, ashamed. Maybe I was wrong too. Maybe I should have tried harder. Called more. Gone home more often. "Camille," Megan said gently, "you reached out. Again and again. You sent letters, invitations. You loved your father even when he couldn't or wouldn't show up for you." Her voice dropped. "And you don't erase that kind of love with gossip." I felt tears gather in my throat, but I didn't let them fall. Because Megan was right. Tomorrow, they would hear the truth. Whether it vindicated me or condemned me, I would no longer be silent. No longer ashamed of the life I built, the path I chose. No longer afraid of being seen. The next morning, I rose early. I chose a simple black dress. I tied my hair back. No makeup, just clarity. Before leaving the hotel, Megan pressed a small envelope into my palm. "Just in case," she said softly. Inside was a folded photo of me at age 10, sitting at my childhood piano. My father behind me with both hands on mine, guiding the keys. I stared at it for a moment, feeling a sharp ache bloom in my chest. "Thank you," I whispered. She nodded. "You've already won. Now go remind them." The offices of Price and Bellamy overlooked Boston Harbor, sleek and quiet, with glass walls and oil paintings that whispered old money. I arrived 5 minutes early, clutching Megan's photo in my coat pocket. My boots clicked against the marble floor as I approached the receptionist. "Camille Turner?" I said. She gave a small nod. "Conference room B. They're already inside." Of course they were. When I entered, every head turned. Miles sat at the head of the long mahogany table like he already owned it. Uncle Charles and Aunt Ruth flanked him, whispering into their coffee cups. The CFO of Turner Financial sat stiffly, his hands folded on a stack of papers. 2 unfamiliar board members looked up from their tablets, vaguely curious. No one said hello, except one. Camille, Alden Price, my father's longtime attorney, stood and offered a firm handshake. "Thank you for coming." His warmth caught me off guard. "Thank you for inviting me," I replied quietly. He gestured to an empty chair at the far end of the table furthest from Miles. I took it without complaint. Miles chuckled under his breath. "Didn't expect you to show," he said. "You usually skip the important stuff." I didn't respond. Alden cleared his throat. "If we're ready, we'll begin." He opened a black leather folder and began his practiced preamble legal terms. Dates, signatures, notarizations. I only half listened, heart pounding in my ears. Then he said, "Per Mr. Franklin Turner's instructions, we will begin with a video statement." That silenced the room. Even Miles shifted in his seat. "A video?" Aunt Ruth asked. "Yes," Alden replied, inserting a USB into the screen projector. "Your father recorded it 3 months before his passing. He requested it be viewed before any written provisions are disclosed." The lights dimmed, the screen flickered, and there he was, my father, alive, sharp navy suit, silver hair, a familiar crease between his brows. He sat at his desk, hands folded, voice clear and deliberate. "If you're watching this," he began, "I am gone." A silence fell so complete it felt like air had been sucked from the room. I've asked Alden to play this message because there are truths I didn't speak aloud while I was alive, truths I regret not confronting sooner. This is not only a will, it's a reckoning. My hands trembled in my lap. He looked straight into the camera. "I want to begin with my daughter. Camille," I froze. So did everyone else. "If you're here, Camille, I hope you know this message is for you." Miles straightened slightly, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "I've made mistakes as a father. Many. But none greater than allowing distance and doubt to replace trust between us. You reached out, again and again, and I didn't answer. I didn't see." His voice faltered for a second, then steadied. "But I see now." The room shifted. I could feel eyes turning toward me. I didn't care. What I didn't know. "Camille," he continued, "what I didn't discover until recently was that the letters you sent never reached me. The invitations, the updates, the messages, they were intercepted." He leaned forward in the video, voice hardening. "By Miles." Gasps broke the silence. "He curated my understanding of you. He filtered my relationship with my own daughter. And I like a fool believed what I was told, that you had abandoned me, that you no longer cared." Miles rose halfway from his seat. "This is insane," he said. "He must have been. Sit down," Alden said firmly. "The video plays in full?" Miles slumped back, jaw tight. My father continued, 6 months ago, I hired a private investigator. I had my doubts. I found confirmation, emails deleted, voicemails rerouted, mail discarded. My relationship with my daughter intentionally severed." His voice dropped. "And that's not all." He opened a folder and held up a sheaf of documents. "I discovered irregularities in my company's projects. Shortcuts, bribes, falsified permits, all under Miles's supervision. There were murmurs. A board member swore under his breath, "I built Turner Financial on values, and my son betrayed them for profit and power." My father's eyes softened again. "But Camille, while I wasn't looking, you became everything I once hoped to be. You built a life with integrity. You gave what little you had to others. You pursued your music not for glory, but because it was true." Tears slipped down my cheeks. "I bought your recordings anonymously. I attended your concert in the back row of that Brooklyn community theater. I heard the music you wrote. It moved me." He took a breath. "You didn't need my approval, but I see now you always deserved it." I closed my eyes. I could barely breathe. "And so," he said, "I have changed my will." The room erupted, but I didn't hear it, because in that moment, I didn't care what I would receive. I had already been given something far greater: the truth, on screen. My father's expression changed, more composed now, more resolute. He leaned forward slightly, folding his hands atop a leather portfolio. I spent my final months revisiting everything I once believed about legacy, not just wealth, but values, and who could carry them forward, who had earned my trust. He paused, then said clearly, "To my son, Miles Turner, I leave a structured cash trust of $250,000 to be distributed annually over 10 years on the condition that he completes a business ethics certification and fully cooperates with an ongoing investigation into misconduct at Turner Financial." The silence that followed was deafening. I turned slowly, watching the color drain from Miles's face. He blinked, as if trying to reset reality. "That can't be right," he muttered. "This is a mistake." But the video continued. "To my daughter, Camille Turner, I leave full ownership of my Beacon Hill residence, all its contents, my personal art collection, and a 60% controlling interest in Turner Financial Holdings." Someone actually gasped aloud. A chair scraped against the floor. Uncle Charles looked like he was about to choke on his own breath. My body went still. I hadn't even dared to hope. "And to Camille," my father said, "I also entrust the establishment of the Franklin Turner Foundation for Arts and Ethics, a nonprofit to support music education in underfunded schools. She will serve as its founding chair. Should she choose to accept this responsibility." My heart stopped. He knew. He had been watching, listening. Not through Miles, but directly, quietly, in his own way. "Camille," he said, locking eyes with the camera, "I know this may come as a shock. I know this is more than you ever asked for. But I believe you are capable of guiding this legacy with honesty and care. Your strength, even in isolation, has shown me what leadership looks like. I am proud of you." Tears blurred my vision. I didn't care if they saw. The video began to close. "Family," he said, his voice growing quiet, "is not just who you are born to. It's who shows up when it's hardest, I hope, with time. You will all come to understand this decision not as punishment, but as truth." He ended with a final line that I would carry with me forever. I only wish I had told Camille all of this in person. Then the screen went black. For a moment, no one moved. Then the room exploded. "That's forged," Miles snapped, shooting to his feet. He was confused. Sick. There's no way he meant that. "He recorded it in perfect health," Alden said calmly, "and he documented every change with full legal oversight. There are medical evaluations in the file if you'd like to contest it in court, but I'd advise against it." Miles stared at him, incredulous. "You can't possibly expect me to sit here while you hand over everything to her." Uncle Charles stood too. Face flushed. "He was manipulated, that video. There's also a written version of the will," Alden added, sliding the folder across the table. "Dated, witnessed, notarized, recorded in duplicate." He looked at me with quiet steadiness. Your father was very thorough. Camille, I couldn't speak, not because I doubted it, but because I was still absorbing the weight of it. For years, I had believed I'd been erased. And now he had carved my name in stone. Miles began pacing, muttering under his breath. I'll contest it. I'll bring it all down if I have to. Alden raised a brow. Then you'll also be contesting the evidence your father collected, including forged inspection reports, falsified expense ledgers, and testimony from 3 employees. Miles stopped moving. And if this matter goes to court, Alden added, all of it becomes public. The blood drained from Miles's face. Slowly, he sat down. No one looked at me. Not Uncle Charles, not Aunt Ruth, not the CFO. They all stared at their hands, their coffee, the carpet, anywhere but me. For once, there was no laughter, just silence. Alden cleared his throat. Camille, your father also left behind a sealed journal for you. His personal notes. I'll make sure it's delivered today. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He looked around the room. Unless there are further objections, this concludes the reading of Franklin Turner's will. I stood slowly. Everyone else remained seated, not because they respected me, but because they no longer knew what to say. And maybe for now that was enough. I didn't leave the office right away. When the others filed out, some silent, some stunned, some avoiding eye contact, I remained seated. My hands still trembled, resting on the smooth wood of the table, as if afraid that moving would make everything disappear. Alden gently placed the leather-bound journal in front of me. He started it about 2 years ago, he said softly. Documented everything, his doubts, his regrets, his hopes. It's yours now. I nodded, throat tight. Thank you. You don't need to rush anything, he added. We'll set up a meeting with the board when you're ready. And, Camille, for what it's worth, your father spoke of you with real pride, especially near the end. I managed a small, broken smile. It would take time to believe that fully, but hearing it from someone else, someone not part of the performance, the manipulation that mattered. That night, back in my hotel room, I opened the journal. The first entries were stiff, businesslike. He wrote about quarterly earnings, market fluctuations, Miles's unshakable ambition, and my frustrating detour into music. But over time, his tone softened, shifted. One entry, dated about 1.5 years ago, stopped me cold. Camille sent another letter. Miles told me she moved again, but the envelope says Brooklyn. I wonder if he's mistaken, or if I am. He knew, somewhere, beneath all the noise, he had begun to question. And then, 6 months before his death, I listened to Camille's recording tonight. Found it online under a different name. One of her students uploaded it. The piece was raw, imperfect, but it made me feel something I haven't felt in years. Guilt, maybe, but also awe. Another entry followed. Hired an investigator. I don't know what I'll find, but I need to know the truth. I owe her that. I read every word of that journal until the sun started to rise. It didn't erase the years we lost, but it rewrote them in a different light. He hadn't stopped caring. He just hadn't known how to reach me or how badly the walls had been built. And he'd tried, in the end, to tear them down. 2 weeks later, I walked through the glass doors of Turner Financial for the first time in 10 years. Not as a visitor, as its majority owner. The reception staff looked up in surprise. One of the assistants rushed to her feet. Ms. Turner, I gave a nod. I have a meeting with the executive team. The walk to the top floor felt surreal. Every detail, the marble floors, the mahogany trim, the portrait of my father in the atrium brought back flashes of childhood, sitting in the back of shareholder meetings coloring in a notebook, practicing handshakes with Dad in the elevator. Now I was here, alone, but not afraid. The boardroom was full when I entered. Some faces looked skeptical, a few neutral, one or two, quietly hopeful. I sat at the head of the table, Miles's old seat, and began. "I'm not here to pretend I'm a finance expert," I said plainly. "I'm not here to micromanage your departments. But I am here to lead." I could feel the temperature shift slightly. Turner Financial will continue to grow, but it will also change. My father believed in ethics and in transparency. Somewhere along the way, we lost that. I intend to bring it back. Some heads nodded, others remained still. That starts with an internal audit of all ongoing projects, especially those under Miles's supervision. I've already hired a third-party compliance team. A murmur ran through the room. And secondly, I will be establishing a partnership between Turner Financial and the Franklin Turner Foundation. A percentage of our quarterly profits will go toward funding arts education in underserved communities. Now they looked surprised. One board member, a woman with silver glasses and a quiet strength in her posture, finally spoke. "That's bold," she said. "It's overdue," I replied. That weekend, I returned to Beacon Hill, my childhood home. It was quieter than I remembered. Dust had settled in corners, and the piano in the music room was covered with a white sheet. I pulled it back slowly, revealing the keys beneath. Some of them were chipped now, others silent. But when I sat and pressed down, a single note rang out, then another, then a third. I played slowly, then faster, until my fingers found the shape of something familiar, something I'd once written at age 12, and never played again. I imagined my father listening from the stairs like he used to, and I hoped, wherever he was now, he could hear it. In the following months, things didn't magically become perfect. Some employees quit, some investors resisted, some family members never called again. But the company stabilized, the foundation launched, and the first school music lab opened in Roxbury that fall with my father's name etched in gold above the door. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, I gave a short speech on my father once said structure comes before emotion. I disagreed, but I understand now both matter, both belong, and this place is where they meet. The first call came from Elise. It surprised me, though, not as much as the way she spoke. "Camille," she said, awkwardly formal. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I said nothing at first. I waited. I believed everything Miles said. She continued. "We all did. You were never around, and he always had a story about why it was easier to accept than to ask questions." I closed my eyes. That sentence, "it was easier to accept than to ask questions," was the thread that tied my entire family together. "I understand," I said finally. "But I need you to know something. I never stopped reaching out. I was erased." A beat of silence passed. "I know that now," she said. "And I hope, maybe, we can find a way to reconnect." I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no. In the weeks that followed, more calls trickled in. Some from genuine remorse. Uncle Charles wrote me a letter, shaky and handwritten, admitting he should have looked Camille in the eyes instead of through Miles's words. Others felt more like strategy. Aunt Ruth invited me to a brunch to talk about the family trust. I declined. Let them sit in that. I had no interest in restoring ties built on calculation. What I did care about, what I did choose to rebuild, was the spirit of the Turner name. Not as Miles had weaponized it, not as a currency of inheritance and status, but as something that could mean legacy without control, success without silence. At Turner Financial, I kept my promise. We restructured 2 major projects, cutting out contractors who had forged permits under Miles's direction. Profits dipped for 1 quarter, but our reputation surged. A prominent ethics journal wrote a piece titled "The Pianist Who Rewrote the Ledgers." It made me laugh and cry. One rainy afternoon, I finally visited the old family vacation cottage in Cape Cod. I hadn't been there since I was 15. The lake was still, the pine trees tall and familiar, and the air held that soft, briny scent that brought everything rushing back. Inside the cabin, tucked away in a drawer beneath the window seat. I found something unexpected, a Polaroid of me and Dad. I was 7, beaming, holding up a fish twice the size of my arm. He stood behind me, one hand on my shoulder, grinning. On the back, in his scrawled handwriting, he'd written my early bird, the one who always saw beauty before the rest of us did. I sat on the floor and cried for a long time, not from grief alone, but from relief. I wasn't invisible. I had never been. That fall, Turner Financial held its annual investor summit. I stood at the podium in the same auditorium where I once sat in the back row with coloring books, while Miles shook hands and Dad shook markets. This time, it was my voice in the microphone. I didn't come here to prove anything. I told the room I came here to honor a man who, in the end, honored me back. My father built this company with vision. I intend to continue with heart. There was applause. Sincere. Not thunderous, not dramatic, but real. Afterward, as the guests mingled over drinks and handshakes, I stepped outside into the courtyard. The evening air was cool, crisp, honest. That's when I saw him. Miles. Standing under the far arch, alone. He looked different, thinner, tired in a way that no suit could disguise. When he saw me, he didn't move. He just held my gaze, as if unsure whether he was welcome. I walked over anyway. We stood in silence for a long time. Then he said, "I thought Dad would never see through me." I said nothing. He looked down. I wanted the company so badly, the approval, the identity. I thought if I controlled the narrative, I could control the legacy. "And did you?" I asked softly. He shook his head. "Turns out, Dad knew what mattered. Just too late, not too late for me." I said, "Not anymore." He looked up. "Are we enemies now?" "No," I replied, "but we're not who we were either." He nodded, as if that was the best he could hope for. He turned to leave. I didn't stop him, because forgiveness isn't always reunion. Sometimes it's just release, and I had things to build, not with him, but with everything he couldn't destroy. The first snowfall arrived quietly. It was the kind of morning where the world felt softened, hushed by the cold. I parked outside the cemetery gates, the same ones I had walked through weeks ago with Megan beside me, heart pounding with dread. This time, I came alone. A simple bouquet of white tulips rested in my hands. They were my mother's favorite, and mine. My boots crunched along the narrow stone path as I made my way toward the Turner family plot. The granite headstone was dusted with a thin layer of snow, the carved letters clean and elegant. Franklin Miles Turner, 1957 to 2024. A builder, a believer, a man who learned. I stood in silence for a long while, watching the wind move through the bare trees, the way the morning light touched the polished stone. Then I knelt and brushed away the snow with my gloves. Placing the tulips at the base, "Hi, Dad," I said softly. "It's me." My breath curled in the air. "The company's doing okay," I continued. "We weathered the backlash from the restructuring. Some clients left, but others came, ones who value ethics more than speed." I paused, then smiled faintly. "And yes, I still teach. Only one afternoon a week, but it helps. Keeps me grounded. The kids don't care about stock prices. They just want to feel something real." The wind answered me with a soft whisper. "I read your journal," I said quietly. Every word, it hurt, but it healed too. I pulled the photo from my coat pocket, the Polaroid of us at Cape Cod. I pressed it gently against the base of the stone, anchoring it under the tulips. "I always thought you forgot me," I whispered. "But you didn't. You were just lost for a while, and so was I." I stood again, brushing snow from my coat. "I want you to know, I'm not just protecting your legacy. I'm redefining it." I looked around the empty cemetery. Then back to his name. The Turner Foundation is funding 6 school music labs next year. Boston, Newark, Detroit. All places where kids have no access to instruments. That's going to change. I took a deep breath. And as for the company, I don't know how long I'll run it. Maybe 5 years, maybe 50. But I'll run it the way you tried to before you forgot what mattered. I glanced at the clouds overhead. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it makes space for something new. A silence settled over me, heavy but peaceful. I pulled the wool scarf tighter around my neck and stepped back. "I love you," I said softly. "Even when it hurt. Even when I didn't think I could." Then I turned and walked away. A month later, I stood in a sunlit gallery in the South End, surrounded by paintings from students across the city. The walls were lined with sketches, brushstrokes, wild imagination. In the center of the room was a piece I had contributed a new composition, scored and framed, titled Structure and Release. It was inspired by my father, not the man who'd ignored my letters, but the one who, in the end, chose to listen. As the event wound down, I stepped outside into the cold air. Megan joined me, steaming coffee in hand. "You did it," she said, bumping my shoulder. "He'd be proud." "I think so too," I replied. "And maybe I'm proud of me now, too." She smiled. "Good. Because you should be." We stood in silence for a moment, watching the snow fall again. Then Megan asked, "So, what comes next?" I smiled. "Something honest? Something mine?" And we walked off into the city, where music waited in every corner. Epilogue. Some stories don't end with applause. They end with a single note, played in a quiet room. They end with a truth finally heard. They end when the daughter no longer waits for permission to exist and instead takes the silence and makes it sing.